The barn door creaked open just wide enough for a woman's slender hand to push through a bundle of blankets and dried venison. And Samuel Lancaster stood frozen in the Montana twilight, watching this act of quiet mercy unfold before his weary eyes. He had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing his horse to the limits after fleeing a card game gone wrong in Virginia City. The year was 1878, and the frontier still held its grip on this wild corner of America. But Samuel had never expected to find such kindness in these harsh mountains. Through the gathering darkness, he could make out 3 figures huddled inside the barn, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. They looked like prospectors who had fallen on hard times, maybe even men running from something themselves. The woman speaking to them had auburn hair tied back in a practical bun, and her dress, though simple and worn, was clean and carefully mended. Samuel guided his black gelding closer, staying in the shadows of the towering pines that surrounded the property. He had learned long ago that approaching strangers in the dark was a good way to catch a bullet, but something about this scene held him captive. The woman was not just giving them food and shelter. She was speaking to them with genuine concern, asking about their health, whether they needed any wounds tended. Her voice carried on the cool mountain air, warm and reassuring, like a mother speaking to frightened children. "You can stay until the storm passes," she was saying. "There should be enough hay to keep you warm, and I will bring more food in the morning. But you must promise me you will cause no trouble. I am alone here, and I am trusting you." The 3 men nodded vigorously, their gratitude evident even from Samuel's distant vantage point. One of them, an older fellow with a salt and pepper beard, actually removed his hat and pressed it to his chest. "Madam, we ain't nothing but honest men down on our luck, lost everything in a claim dispute up north. You got our word we will be gone as soon as the weather clears, and we will not forget your kindness." Samuel watched as the woman nodded, pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and made her way back toward the modest cabin that stood about 50 yards from the barn. The property was well maintained despite its remote location, with a chicken coop, a small vegetable garden that had been put to bed for the approaching winter, and a sturdy fence that kept a few head of cattle contained in the western pasture. This was the home of someone who worked hard and knew how to survive in this unforgiving land. As the woman disappeared into her cabin, lamplight soon glowing warm in the windows, Samuel made a decision. His horse needed rest, and so did he. More than that, something about what he had just witnessed stirred something in his chest that had been dormant for longer than he cared to admit. In a world where most people looked out only for themselves, where trust was a commodity more valuable than gold, this woman was opening her barn to strangers. He waited another hour, until full darkness had settled and the men in the barn had quieted down for the night. Then he led his horse forward slowly, deliberately making noise so as not to startle anyone. When he was 20 feet from the cabin, the front door opened, and the woman stepped out with a rifle held competently in her hands. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice steady despite the obvious danger of a lone rider approaching in the night. "State your business." Samuel raised both hands, keeping them well away from the revolver at his hip. "Madam, I mean no harm. I have been riding for days, and my horse is near done in. I saw your barn and hoped you might have space for one more traveler. I can pay." He reached slowly into his vest pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch that jingled with coins. The woman studied him for a long moment, and Samuel found himself hoping she could see that he was telling the truth. Finally, she lowered the rifle slightly, though she kept it at the ready. "The barn is already occupied, as I suspect you know. But there is a lean-to on the north side where you can shelter your horse. You can sleep there too if you are willing. It is not much, but it will keep the rain off." "That is more than generous, madam. I am grateful. I will bring you some food and water. See to your horse first." She paused, then added, "And keep that gun holstered. I am a good shot and I do not sleep heavy." Samuel could not help but smile, though he kept it small and respectful. "Yes, madam, you have my word." He led his horse around to the north side of the barn, where he found the lean-to exactly as she had described. It was simple but solid, with 3 walls and a roof that would indeed keep the weather out. He unsaddled his gelding, rubbed the animal down with handfuls of dry grass, and made sure it had access to the water trough. The horse drank deeply, and Samuel felt a pang of guilt for having pushed the animal so hard. True to her word, the woman appeared 15 minutes later carrying a plate of cold cornbread and beans, along with a mason jar filled with fresh water. Up close, Samuel could see she was probably in her mid-20s, with green eyes that held both intelligence and caution. There was a faint scar along her left cheekbone, barely visible in the lamplight she carried, and her hands were calloused from hard work. "Thank you," Samuel said, accepting the food. "I am Samuel Lancaster. Most folks call me Sam." "Temperance Oakley," she replied. "This is my land. I run it myself, so I will thank you to respect that and be on your way come morning." "You have my word, Miss Oakley." "It is Mrs. Oakley," she corrected, though something flickered across her face when she said it. "Or it was. My husband passed 2 years back, logging accident up in the hills." "I am sorry for your loss." Temperance nodded once, a short, quick gesture that suggested she had made her peace with grief, or at least learned to carry it. "Eat and rest. I will check on you and the others in the morning." She turned to leave, then paused. "Why are you running?" The question caught Samuel off guard. "What makes you think I am running?" A man does not ride his horse near to death unless he is running from something or toward something urgent. You do not have the look of a man rushing to save someone, so I figure you are running. I do not need to know from what, but I will not harbor criminals on my land. So I am asking you straight. Are you a danger to me or mine? Samuel met her eyes and saw that she would know if he lied. "I got into a disagreement over cards in Virginia City. Some men thought I cheated." "I did not, but they were not interested in listening to reason. So yes, I am running, but not from the law, just from angry men with more pride than sense. I am no danger to you, Mrs. Oakley. I just need a night's rest, and then I will be moving on toward Deer Lodge." Temperance studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But like I told those men in the barn, I am trusting you. Do not make me regret it. I would not dream of it." She left him then, and Samuel ate the simple meal with more gratitude than he had felt for any fancy restaurant fare back in his previous life. The cornbread was perfectly made, with just the right amount of salt, and the beans had been seasoned with something that gave them a rich, smoky flavor. This was food made by someone who knew how to make a little go a long way, how to turn basic ingredients into something nourishing and good. As he settled into the straw bedding in the lean-to, his saddle serving as a pillow, Samuel found his thoughts drifting back to Temperance Oakley. There was something remarkable about her, something beyond her obvious physical beauty. She was a woman alone on the frontier, managing a homestead by herself, and yet she still found it in her heart to help strangers. In his experience, people who lived alone tended to become suspicious and hard. Temperance had certainly been cautious, but there was no meanness in her, no bitter edge that so often came with hardship. He fell asleep to the sound of rain beginning to patter on the roof, grateful for shelter and wondering what the morning would bring. Samuel woke to the sound of chickens clucking and the smell of wood smoke. Dawn was just breaking, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost too beautiful for this harsh land. He stood, stretched the kinks out of his back, and walked around to the front of the property. Temperance was already up, scattering feed for the chickens, her hair now braided down her back and her sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill. "Good morning," Samuel called out, not wanting to startle her. She glanced up, nodded in acknowledgement, and continued her work. "There is coffee in the cabin if you want some. Help yourself, then I would appreciate it if you moved on. Those men in the barn will be leaving soon too. Storm has passed." Samuel walked to the cabin, poured himself a cup of strong black coffee from the pot sitting on the stove, and stepped back outside. The three men from the barn were emerging, looking considerably better than they had the night before. They thanked Temperance profusely, promised to remember her kindness, and headed off on foot toward the main road. Samuel watched them go, noting how Temperance had also given them a sack of provisions for their journey. "You do this often?" he found himself asking. "Help strangers, I mean." Temperance finished with the chickens and straightened up, brushing her hands on her apron. "Often enough. This land is hard on people. Sometimes folks just need a bit of help to get back on their feet. My parents taught me that when you have the means to help, you do it. Simple as that." "Not everyone sees it that way." "No, I suppose they do not." She looked at him directly. "You are still here." "I am." Samuel took a breath. "Mrs. Oakley, I wonder if you might have any work that needs doing. I noticed your fence on the western pasture has some posts that are leaning pretty bad. And that chicken coop could use some reinforcement before winter truly sets in. I am good with my hands, and I could use some honest work. I would not ask for much, just meals and a place to sleep until the jobs are done." Temperance's eyebrows rose slightly. "I thought you were heading to Deer Lodge." "I was. I am. But there is nothing waiting for me there that cannot wait a few more days, and it seems to me you could use the help." She was silent for a long moment, and Samuel could see her weighing the risks. A strange man, staying on her property, working in close quarters. It was a lot to ask, especially of a woman alone. But he had seen the way she looked at those sagging fence posts, the worry that crossed her face when the wind rattled the chicken coop. She needed help, even if her pride made it hard to accept. "1 week," she finally said. "You can stay 1 week. I will feed you and give you a place in the barn now that it is empty. You fix the fence and the coop and anything else I see that needs doing. At the end of the week we settle up and you go on your way." "Agreed." "Agreed." Samuel extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Temperance shook it. Her grip was firm and work roughened, the handshake of someone who knew the value of keeping her word. "I will get you some breakfast, then you can get started. Days are getting shorter, so we need to make use of the light." Over the next few days, Samuel fell into a rhythm on the Oakley homestead. He rose with the sun, ate a quick breakfast of whatever Temperance prepared, and spent the daylight hours working on the various repairs the property needed. The fence posts were worse than he had initially thought, requiring him to dig out the old posts completely and set new ones. It was back-breaking work, but satisfying in a way that his previous life had never been. Samuel had grown up in St. Louis, the son of a successful merchant who had expected him to take over the family business. Instead, Samuel had headed west at 18, drawn by stories of adventure and freedom. He had tried his hand at prospecting, cattle driving, and even a stint as a deputy in a small Wyoming town. Nothing had quite stuck, and he had drifted from place to place, never putting down roots, never finding anything worth staying for. But there was something about this place, about Temperance Oakley, that made him want to slow down. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. She worked from dawn until well past dusk, tending to her cattle, maintaining her garden, preserving food for winter. She could shoot better than most men, splitting wood with an axe like she had been born with one in her hands. And yet, there was a gentleness to her that showed itself in unexpected moments. He saw it in the way she talked to her animals, the care she took with her cooking, the small wildflowers she kept in a jar on her kitchen table. On the third evening, as Samuel was finishing up work on the chicken coop, Temperance brought him a cup of coffee and stood watching him work. "You are good at this," she observed. "The carpentry. Did you learn it from your father?" Samuel smiled, hammering in another nail with practiced efficiency. "No, my father was a merchant, thought working with his hands was beneath him. I learned from a man I worked with up in Wyoming. He was a homesteader who took me in one winter when I was down on my luck, taught me that honest work with your hands is nothing to be ashamed of." Sounds like a wise man. He was. Samuel set down his hammer and accepted the coffee gratefully. "What about you? Did your husband teach you to run this place?" A shadow crossed Temperance's face, but she did not look away. "Some, but mostly I learned from necessity. James was a good man, but he was better with the timber than with the homestead. When he died, I had a choice: sell the land and move back east to live with my sister or figure out how to make it work on my own. I chose to stay. Why? Because this is my home. James and I built this together, dreamed of what it could be. Just because he is gone does not mean those dreams have to die too." She took a sip from her own coffee cup. "And because I am stubborn. Everyone said a woman could not run a homestead alone. I wanted to prove them wrong. I would say you have succeeded." Temperance gave him a small smile, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face, bringing warmth to her features and a light to her eyes. "Most days I feel like I am barely keeping my head above water, but I manage. You do more than manage. This place is well run, well maintained. You should be proud." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Samuel felt something shift in the air between them. It was not just attraction, though he could not deny he felt that too. It was recognition, a sense of understanding passing between two people who had both known hardship and chosen to keep going anyway. "Thank you," Temperance said softly. "That means more than you might think." They stood there in the gathering twilight, drinking their coffee and listening to the chickens settle in for the night. And Samuel realized he was not looking forward to leaving in a few days. The next morning, Samuel was repairing the barn door when a rider approached the property. He was a large man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been on the losing end of too many fights. He wore a deputy's badge, but there was nothing lawful in the way he looked at Temperance when she came out to greet him. "Morning, Temperance," the man said, not bothering to dismount. "See, you have got yourself some help." "Morning, Dale. This is Mr. Lancaster. He is doing some repairs for me." Temperance's voice had gone cool and formal, nothing like the warmth Samuel had heard the night before. Dale's eyes narrowed as he looked Samuel up and down. "That's so. And where did you find this helpful stranger?" "He came through looking for shelter. I hired him for some work. Is there something you need, Dale, or are you just passing through?" The deputy finally dismounted, moving closer to Temperance than Samuel thought was appropriate. "Now, that is no way to talk to an old friend. I was just checking on you, making sure you are all right out here all alone." "I am fine, as you can see." "You know, Temperance, you do not have to be alone. I have asked you more than once to consider my offer. You could sell this place and we could start fresh together. I have got a good position in Deer Lodge now. I could take care of you." Samuel saw Temperance's jaw tighten. "I have told you before, Dale, I am not interested. I am not selling my land and I am not looking for anyone to take care of me. I do just fine on my own." Dale's face flushed red and his voice took on an edge. "That's pride talking. How long do you think you can keep this up? A woman alone trying to run a homestead. It is not natural. You need a man whether you want to admit it or not." "I think the lady has made herself clear," Samuel said, stepping forward. He kept his voice level, but there was steel underneath. "She is not interested." Dale whirled on him, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. "I was not talking to you, Drifter. This is between me and Temperance." "No, it is not," Temperance said firmly. "You need to leave now, Dale. I have work to do, and so does Mr. Lancaster." For a moment, Samuel thought Dale might push it further, might try to assert some kind of authority or make threats. But something in Temperance's eyes must have convinced him it was not worth it. He mounted his horse roughly, jerking the reins harder than necessary. "You are making a mistake, Temperance. One of these days you are going to need help, and I might not be around to offer it. I will take my chances." Dale rode off without another word, kicking up dust as he went. Samuel watched him until he was out of sight, then turned to Temperance. She was standing rigidly, her arms crossed, her face tight with anger. "How long has he been bothering you?" Samuel asked gently. "Since James died." "He was James's friend, or so I thought. Barely waited until the funeral was over before he started coming around with his offers. He wants the land more than he wants me, I think. My property borders his brother's ranch, and they have been trying to buy it from me for 2 years. And when you refused to sell," Dale started making life difficult, spreading rumors in town that I was struggling, that the homestead was failing. Trying to pressure me into accepting his help, which would put me in his debt. She uncrossed her arms and let out a long breath. "I appreciate you standing up for me just now, but it might have been better if you had stayed out of it. Dale is not a man who forgets a slight." "I am not worried about Dale. Maybe you should be. He has friends and he does not play fair." Samuel met her eyes. "Neither do I when it comes to protecting people who deserve better." Something in Temperance's expression softened. "You are a strange man, Samuel Lancaster. You drift in here out of nowhere, ask for work instead of just moving on, and now you are making enemies on my behalf. What exactly are you running from that makes you want to stay in one place and court trouble?" It was a fair question, and Samuel found himself wanting to answer honestly. "I am not sure I was running from anything. Maybe I was running towards something, and I just did not know what it was until I found it." Temperance looked at him for a long moment, and Samuel could see her mind working, trying to decide if she believed him, if she could trust what was happening between them. Finally, she nodded. "Finish the barn door. I need to check on the cattle." She walked away, leaving Samuel to his thoughts and his work, but something had changed. The walls she had carefully maintained were showing cracks, and Samuel found himself hoping he might be the kind of man worth letting in. That evening, Temperance invited Samuel to eat dinner inside the cabin rather than bringing his food out to him. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. They sat across from each other at her modest table, eating venison stew and fresh bread, and for the first time, their conversation moved beyond the practical matters of the homestead. "Tell me about St. Louis," Temperance said. "What made you leave a comfortable life for all this?" Samuel wiped his mouth with a cloth napkin and considered the question. "I think I was suffocating there. My father had my whole life planned out before I was old enough to have a say in it. I would work in his store, marry the daughter of his business partner, take over the business when he retired, and have children who would do the same. It was safe and predictable, and it felt like dying by inches. So you chose this instead. Drifting, running from card games, sleeping in strangers' barns." He laughed at that. "When you put it that way, it does not sound like much of an improvement. But yes, I suppose I did. At least out here, I get to decide what my life looks like, even if I am not always proud of those decisions." "Do you ever regret it, leaving?" "Sometimes. Mostly I regret that I left the way I did without really explaining to my parents why I could not stay. They deserved better than a note and an empty room, but the actual leaving, no, I do not regret that." Temperance nodded slowly. I understand that. The need to choose your own path, even when it is harder. My parents wanted me to marry a banker back in Ohio. He was stable and well off, everything they thought I should want. But I met James, and he was talking about heading west to work the timber, and I knew that was the life I wanted. Adventure, building something of our own. My parents thought I was crazy. Do you think they were right? No. Even after everything that happened, even losing James, I do not regret coming west. This land gets into your blood. The freedom of it, the possibility. Back east, everything felt small and prescribed. Out here, you can be whoever you want to be. Even a woman running her own homestead. Temperance smiled. Especially that. They talked long into the evening, the conversation flowing easily between them. Samuel learned that Temperance loved to read, though books were hard to come by, and that she had taught herself to play the harmonica during the long winter evenings. She learned that Samuel had a gift for languages, and had picked up enough Crow and Salish to trade with the native peoples when he had worked as a scout. They discovered they both loved the mountains in autumn. Both preferred coffee to tea, and both had a streak of stubbornness that had gotten them into trouble more than once. When Samuel finally excused himself for the evening and headed back to the barn, he felt more content than he had in years. And when he lay down in the hay, he did not think about Deer Lodge or where he might drift next. He thought about auburn hair and green eyes, and a voice that could be stern one moment and gentle the next. The week Samuel had agreed to stay turned into 2, and then 3. There was always something that needed doing on the homestead, and Temperance seemed content to have him stay. They fell into an easy partnership, working side by side during the day and sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Samuel repaired the roof of the cabin, reinforced the cattle fence, and built a new storage shed for winter supplies. Temperance taught him how she preserved meat for the cold months, showed him the best places to hunt on her land, and one memorable afternoon, let him try his hand at milking her stubborn old cow. "You have got to be firmer with her," Temperance said, trying not to laugh as the cow sidestepped away from Samuel for the 3rd time. "She can sense you are nervous." "I am not nervous, I am cautious. There is a difference." "Samuel Lancaster, I have seen you face down Dale without blinking, but one old cow has you scared. Dale does not have hooves." Temperance did laugh then, a full, genuine sound that made Samuel's heart skip. He loved making her laugh, loved the way her whole face lit up, and the years of hardship seemed to fall away. Over the weeks, he had seen her slowly relax around him, the walls she had built coming down brick by brick. "Here, let me show you," Temperance said, moving to sit beside him on the milking stool. She placed her hands over his, guiding them to the right position, and Samuel became acutely aware of her closeness, the warmth of her body next to his, the faint scent of lavender soap she used. Gentle but confident. Like this, under her guidance, milk finally began to flow into the bucket, and Samuel felt ridiculously proud of himself. "I did it, you did." Temperance had not moved away, and when Samuel turned his head, her face was inches from his. He could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the way her lips parted slightly as their eyes met. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then the cow shifted, bumping the bucket and breaking the spell. Temperance stood quickly, smoothing her skirt. "You have got the hang of it now. Finish up and I will start on dinner." She hurried away, and Samuel let out a long breath. Something was building between them, something that felt both exciting and terrifying. He had never wanted to stay in one place before, never wanted to put down roots. But with Temperance, he found himself imagining a future. Waking up in this cabin every morning, working this land side by side, building a life together, The question was whether Temperance wanted the same thing. That night, after dinner, they sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set over the mountains. It had become their routine, this quiet time at the end of the day where they talked or simply enjoyed the companionable silence. But tonight, Temperance seemed troubled, her brow furrowed as she stared out at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked. "Winter is coming. It will be here in a few weeks and the mountain passes will close. If you are planning to move on to Deer Lodge, you should go soon." "Is that what you want? For me to go?" Temperance was quiet for a long moment. "What I want does not really matter. You are a drifter, Samuel. You said so yourself. You have never stayed in one place for long. Why would this be any different because you are here?" The words hung in the air between them, simple and honest. Temperance turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. "Do not say things like that unless you mean them. I cannot. I will not let myself hope for something that is not real." Samuel reached out and took her hand, feeling it tremble slightly in his. "Temperance, I have drifted for 10 years because I was looking for something I could not name, a place that felt like home, a reason to stay. I found that here, with you. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you have every reason to be cautious, but what I feel for you is real. The question is not whether I want to stay. It is whether you want me to." Temperance's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am scared. When James died, I thought I would never feel this way about anyone again. I was content with that, or I told myself I was. But then you showed up, and you made me remember what it feels like to have a partner, someone to share the burden and the joy. And that terrifies me because I know what it is like to lose it. I cannot promise you that nothing will ever happen to me. Life out here is unpredictable, and we both know that. But I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to stay by your side. To build a life with you if you will have me. Samuel." She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. "Are you sure? This is not an easy life. The winters are brutal, the work is endless, and Dale will make things difficult if he thinks there is something between us. Let him try. I'm not afraid of Dale or hard work or brutal winters. The only thing I am afraid of is walking away from this and spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Temperance smiled through her tears. "You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." She laughed, and then, before Samuel could think too much about it, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But instead she leaned into him, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek. The kiss deepened, and Samuel felt like something inside him that had been restless and searching finally settled into place. When they finally pulled apart, Temperance rested her forehead against his. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay and help me run this homestead. Stay and be my partner. Stay and let me fall completely in love with you." "I am already there," Samuel said. "The falling in love part, I think I have been since I saw you giving food to those strangers in the barn. That seems like a lifetime ago. It was 3 weeks, like I said, a lifetime." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, making plans and promises, and Samuel knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Samuel's life. He and Temperance worked together to prepare the homestead for winter, cutting and stacking firewood, preserving the last of the garden harvest, and making sure the barn and cabin were sealed tight against the coming cold. But there was a new dimension to their partnership now, a tenderness that showed itself in small touches and stolen kisses, in the way they moved around each other with an easy intimacy. Samuel moved from the barn into the cabin, and waking up next to Temperance became his favorite part of each day. She was beautiful in the morning light, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face soft with sleep. Sometimes she would wake to find him watching her, and she would smile and pull him close, and the rest of the world would fall away for a while. But their happiness was not without its challenges. Dale continued to be a problem, riding by the property more often than his duties as deputy required, always watching with hostile eyes. Word spread through Deer Lodge that the widow Oakley had taken up with a drifter, and the gossip was not kind. Some of Temperance's neighbors stopped by to express their concern, though Samuel suspected they were more interested in satisfying their curiosity than in Temperance's well-being. "Let them talk," Temperance said one evening after a particularly uncomfortable visit from a neighbor who had made it clear she thought Temperance was making a mistake. "People always need something to talk about, and we are providing good entertainment apparently. Does it bother you?" "What they say? It would bother me more if I let other people's opinions dictate how I live my life. I learned that lesson when I married James. Everyone had something to say about that too, and we were happy anyway." She moved closer to Samuel, wrapping her arms around him. "I am happy now. That is what matters." Samuel held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, and silently vowed to prove to everyone that he was worthy of her trust and love. The first real test came in mid-October, when a group of cattle rustlers was reported in the area. Dale showed up at the homestead with 2 other men, ostensibly to warn them to be on the lookout. But there was something in the way he looked at Temperance, a smugness that set Samuel's teeth on edge. "These rustlers are dangerous," Dale said, directing his words to Temperance even though Samuel was standing right beside her. "You should not be out here alone. It would be safer if you came into town for a while. You could stay at the boarding house and I could make sure you are protected." "I am not alone," Temperance replied coolly, "and I am perfectly capable of protecting my own property." "You mean him?" Dale jerked his chin toward Samuel. "A drifter you barely know. Temperance, use your head. When trouble comes, he will be gone, and you will be left dealing with the consequences." Samuel felt his temper flare, but Temperance squeezed his hand in warning. "Thank you for the warning, Dale. We will be careful. Now if you will excuse us, we have work to do." Dale's face darkened, but he could not push it without revealing his true motivations. He and his men rode off, and Samuel watched them go with a growing sense of unease. "He is planning something," Samuel said. "I can feel it. Probably. Dale does not like being told no." Temperance turned to face him. "But we cannot live our lives in fear of what he might do. We just need to be smart and careful." They doubled their vigilance, taking turns standing watch at night and making sure their weapons were always within reach. Samuel taught Temperance some tricks he had learned during his time as a deputy, ways to spot when someone was watching the property or planning an approach. She was a quick learner, and Samuel felt confident they could handle most threats. What they could not handle came 2 weeks later, in the form of a fire. Samuel woke to the smell of smoke and was on his feet in seconds, grabbing his boots and his gun. Temperance was right behind him, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. "The barn," she gasped, and they both ran outside. Flames were licking up the side of the barn, spreading quickly despite the late-season dampness. Samuel's mind raced. The barn was full of hay, and if the fire reached that, the whole structure would go up in minutes. They had to act fast. "Start pumping water," Samuel shouted to Temperance. "I am going to get the animals out." He ran toward the barn, covering his mouth with his sleeve against the smoke. The heat was intense, and he could hear the terrified sounds of the horses inside. He threw open the doors and plunged into the smoke-filled interior, feeling his way to the stalls. His eyes were streaming tears from the smoke, but he managed to get the first horse out, slapping its rump to send it running toward the pasture. He went back for the second horse, and then the old milk cow. his lungs burning with every breath. By the time he got all the animals out, Temperance had organized a bucket line from the pump, and together they fought the fire with everything they had. Samuel climbed onto the roof and beat at the flames with wet blankets while Temperance kept the water coming. It took hours, but they finally got the fire under control. The barn was damaged but still standing, and they had saved most of their supplies. As the sun rose, Samuel and Temperance stood looking at the charred remains of one wall, exhausted and covered in soot. "This was not an accident," Temperance said quietly. "Someone set this fire." Samuel nodded grimly. "Dale, we cannot prove it." "No, but we both know it was him." Samuel put his arm around Temperance's shoulders. "He is trying to scare you to make you think you cannot manage on your own." "Well, he is wrong." Temperance's voice was fierce despite her exhaustion. "We will rebuild. We will make this place stronger than it was before. And I will not give him the satisfaction of seeing me afraid." Samuel looked at this incredible woman, covered in ash and soot, her face set with determination, and fell even more deeply in love with her. "Then we rebuild, together." They spent the next week repairing the fire damage, and Samuel made sure that everyone in Deer Lodge knew he suspected Dale was behind it. He could not prove it, but he wanted Dale to know that he was watching, that any further attempts at intimidation would be met with resistance. The tension between them simmered, but Dale seemed to back off, at least for the time being. As winter set in with a vengeance, the homestead became a world unto itself. Snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when Samuel and Temperance could not venture outside except to tend to the animals. But rather than feeling isolated, Samuel found these long winter days to be some of the best of his life. They read together by the fire, Temperance sharing her precious collection of books that she had read dozens of times but still loved. Samuel taught her to play poker, and she taught him to knit, claiming he needed a useful skill for the long evenings. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. "I want children," Temperance said one evening as they lay in bed, the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I always thought I would have them with James, but that did not happen. Now I am 26, and I am starting to think it might not happen at all." Samuel rolled onto his side to face her. "Is that something you want with me? Would that frighten you if I said yes?" "No, it would make me happier than you know." He reached out to touch her face gently. "I want to build a life with you, Temperance. A real life with children and grandchildren and everything that comes with it. I want to marry you if you will have me." Temperance's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Are you asking me? I suppose I am. Though I am doing it badly, with no ring and lying in bed in our night clothes." Samuel sat up, suddenly nervous. "Let me do this properly." "Samuel, you do not have to." But he was already out of bed, kneeling on the floor beside her. "Temperance Oakley, I know I am just a drifter who showed up on your property a few months ago with nothing but a tired horse and a bag of coins. I know you could do better, that you deserve someone who has more to offer. But I love you with everything I am, and I promise to spend the rest of my life working to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" Temperance was crying openly now, but her smile was radiant. "You foolish man, you are already worthy, and yes, I will marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Samuel climbed back into bed and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise he felt. They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating their commitment to each other, and when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, Samuel knew he had found his home at last. They married in early spring, as soon as the passes cleared enough for the circuit preacher to make his way through. It was a small ceremony, held in the cabin with just a few neighbors as witnesses. Temperance wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and Samuel wore the only suit he owned, carefully brushed and mended. They spoke their vows with hands clasped and eyes locked on each other, promising to love and honor and cherish for as long as they both lived. Dale did not attend, but his absence was a relief more than anything else. Samuel had made it clear that any further harassment would be met with legal action, and Dale seemed to have finally accepted that Temperance was not going to change her mind. As spring turned to summer, Samuel and Temperance settled into married life. Samuel officially became the co-owner of the homestead, and together they made plans to expand. They bought more cattle with the money Samuel had saved, improved the irrigation for the garden, and even started talking about building an addition to the cabin. In late summer, Temperance announced she was pregnant. Samuel had never known joy like he felt in that moment. He picked her up and spun her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down, worried about the baby. They spent the evening making plans, discussing names and arguing good-naturedly about whether they wanted a boy or a girl. "I do not care what we have," Samuel said, his hand resting on Temperance's still flat belly. "As long as both of you are healthy and safe. A boy would be good, someone to help you with the heavy work. A girl would be wonderful, especially if she is anything like her mother." Temperance smiled and kissed him. "Let us just hope for a healthy baby and be grateful for whatever we get." The pregnancy was not easy. Temperance suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the work of the homestead became more difficult for her. Samuel took on as much as he could, often working from dawn until well past dark to make sure everything was taken care of. He did not mind the extra work. Seeing Temperance grow round with their child filled him with a fierce protectiveness and love. In early spring, on a day when the mountain wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, Temperance went into labor. Samuel had arranged for a midwife from Deer Lodge to come stay with them as the due date approached, and Mrs. Henderson proved to be a calm and competent presence as Temperance labored through the afternoon and into the evening. Samuel paced outside the bedroom, feeling utterly useless and terrified. Every cry of pain from Temperance made him want to burst through the door, but Mrs. Henderson had firmly instructed him to stay out and let her work. So he paced and prayed and promised God anything if only Temperance and the baby would be all right. Finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard the thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Lancaster, a big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." Samuel pushed past her into the room where Temperance lay propped up on pillows, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with happiness. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when Samuel approached, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," Temperance said softly. "I was thinking we could call him Stephen after your father." Samuel felt tears running down his face as he looked at his son, this perfect little person who was half him and half the woman he loved more than life itself. "Stephen Lancaster. It is perfect." He sat on the edge of the bed and put his arm around Temperance, the three of them together for the first time as a family. And Samuel knew that every choice he had made, every mile he had drifted, every mistake and triumph, had led him to this moment. The years that followed were full and rich. Stephen grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved following his father around the homestead, asking endless questions and trying to help with every task. 2 years after Stephen was born, Temperance gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her mother's green eyes and stubborn streak. And 3 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas, and who seemed determined from birth to keep up with his older siblings. The homestead prospered under Samuel and Temperance's careful management. They expanded their cattle operation, built that addition to the cabin, and even hired occasional help during the busiest seasons. Samuel's skill with carpentry became well known in the area, and he often took on side jobs building furniture or helping neighbors with construction projects. Dale eventually moved away from Deer Lodge, accepting a position as sheriff in a town farther west. The rumor was that his brother had sold the ranch that bordered Temperance's land, tired of the isolation and hard winters. Samuel could not say he was sorry to see the back of either of them. As the children grew, Samuel made sure they understood the importance of their mother's generosity, the trait that had first captured his heart. Temperance still opened their barn to travelers in need, though now with Samuel by her side and 3 children watching curiously from the porch. She taught their children that having enough meant sharing with those who had less, that kindness was not a weakness, but a strength. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Temperance stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching their children play in the yard. Stephen was 13 now, already showing signs of the man he would become. Sarah was 10, with her mother's fierce independence and her father's gentle heart. Thomas was 7, all energy and mischief and laughter. You ever think about those first days? Temperance asked, leaning into Samuel's embrace. When you showed up out of nowhere asking for work, all the time, I think about how close I came to just riding on to never knowing what I would be missing. I am glad you stayed. So am I, more than I can ever say. Samuel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. You saved me, you know. I was lost, drifting, and you gave me a place to belong. We saved each other, Temperance corrected. I was so busy surviving I had forgotten how to live. You reminded me. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. The homestead spread out before them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and love. The barn where Samuel had first seen Temperance's generosity still stood, rebuilt and stronger after the fire. The fields were green and full of promise, and everywhere Samuel looked, he saw the life they had built together. Stephen came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. Pa, there is a family on the road. They look tired and their wagon has a broken wheel. Can they stay in the barn while they fix it? Samuel and Temperance exchanged a look, remembering another time, another group of strangers in need. Samuel smiled and nodded. Go tell them they are welcome to shelter in the barn. Your mother will bring them some food and I will help them with that wheel in the morning. Stephen ran off to relay the message, and Temperance squeezed Samuel's hand. Some things never change. Thank God for that. As Temperance went inside to prepare food for their unexpected guests, Samuel remained on the porch, watching his son welcome the strangers with the same generous spirit his mother had shown all those years ago. The cycle continued, kindness begetting kindness, and Samuel felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had spent his youth searching for adventure, for freedom, for something he could not name. What he had found was so much better than anything he had imagined. He had found home. He had found love. He had found purpose. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The children grew into young adults with their own dreams and ambitions. Stephen, true to his nature, stayed close to home, taking over more and more of the homestead's operations as Samuel and Temperance aged. At 20, he married a sweet-natured girl from Deer Lodge named Mary, and they built a small house on the northern edge of the property. Sarah proved to be as independent as her mother, heading to Helena at 18 to train as a teacher. She returned 2 years later with a teaching certificate and a quiet, scholarly husband named Robert. They settled in Deer Lodge, where Sarah opened the town's first proper school, but they visited the homestead often, especially after their twin daughters were born. Thomas was the wanderer of the family, inheriting his father's restless spirit. At 17, he headed west to work on the expanding railroad, promising to write often and visit when he could. His letters came regularly, full of stories of new places and adventures, and Samuel read them with understanding and pride. He knew Thomas needed to find his own path, just as Samuel once had. As Samuel entered his 50s, his hair shot through with gray and his hands showing the wear of decades of hard work. He sometimes thought about the young man who had ridden up to this homestead so many years ago. That Samuel had been searching, uncertain, running from one place to another in the hope that movement would fill the emptiness inside him. This Samuel was settled, certain, rooted as deeply in this Montana soil as the ancient pines. He woke each morning next to the woman he loved, worked land that belonged to him, and watched his grandchildren play in the same yard where his own children had grown up. He had everything he had never known to want. One evening in late summer, as Samuel and Temperance sat on their porch watching the sunset, a lone rider approached the homestead. Samuel's hand automatically went to the rifle he kept nearby, but he relaxed as he recognized the figure. It was Thomas, returned home unexpectedly after 2 years away. Temperance cried as she embraced her youngest son, and Samuel felt his own eyes mist over as he gripped Thomas's shoulder. The young man was 22 now, broad-shouldered and weathered from his time working outdoors. "I thought you were in California," Samuel said as they all settled on the porch, Temperance insisting on fetching coffee and cake, despite Thomas's protests that he was not hungry. "I was, but I realized something while I was out there." Thomas accepted the coffee his mother brought and took a sip before continuing. "I was doing exactly what you did, Pa, running from place to place, looking for something without knowing what it was, and then I met someone." Temperance's face lit up. "A girl," Thomas smiled a little sheepishly. "Her name is Clara. Her family runs a hotel in Sacramento. She is smart and kind and everything I could want, and when I told her I was from Montana, she said she had always wanted to see the mountains. So I was thinking, maybe I could bring her here. Maybe we could build a life on this land, like you and Ma did." Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "There is nothing that would make us happier. This land is big enough for all of you if you want it." They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Thomas would return to California to marry Clara, and they would come back to Montana in the spring. Stephen and his growing family were already established on the north pasture. Perhaps Thomas and Clara could build on the southern section, near the creek where the fishing was good. After Thomas had gone to bed in his old room, Samuel and Temperance remained on the porch, holding hands and watching the stars. "We did well," Temperance said softly. "Our children are happy and good people. We should be proud." "I am proud of them and of you and of the life we built together." Samuel brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Temperance Lancaster, just as much today as I did the day I asked you to marry me, more even. I love you too. You are the best decision I ever made, even if you did show up as a stranger asking for work." "I was not a stranger. I was your future husband. You just did not know it yet." Temperance laughed, the sound as warm and bright as it had been 30 years ago when Samuel first made her smile. "Is that how you remember it?" "That is exactly how I remember it." They sat together under the vast Montana sky, their hands intertwined, their hearts full. The homestead that Temperance had fought so hard to keep had become a legacy, a place where multiple generations would grow and thrive. The barn where Samuel had first witnessed her generosity still stood strong, its doors open to any who needed shelter. And Samuel, who had once drifted aimlessly across the frontier, had found his anchor. He had found his home. He had found his forever in the gentle strength of a woman who opened her barn to strangers, and in doing so, had opened her heart to love. As the years continued to unfold, the Lancaster homestead became known throughout the region as a place of hospitality and kindness. Samuel and Temperance, now in their 60s, spent their days in quieter pursuits. Samuel crafted furniture in the workshop he had built, his skilled hands creating beautiful pieces for his children and grandchildren. Temperance tended her garden and taught her granddaughters to preserve food, passing down the skills that had sustained her through the hardest years. Stephen and Mary had given them 4 grandchildren who ran wild across the property, with the confidence of children who knew they were deeply loved. Sarah's twin daughters visited often from Deer Lodge, bringing books and stories of the school where their mother taught. And Thomas, true to his word, had returned with Clara, a lovely young woman whose laugh reminded Samuel of Temperance in her youth. Thomas and Clara built their house near the creek and welcomed their first child, a son they named Samuel, 2 years after settling on the land. When Temperance placed her infant grandson in Samuel's arms for the first time, he wept openly, overwhelmed by the fullness of his life. "Your grandfather is getting sentimental in his old age," Temperance teased gently, wiping tears from her own eyes. "Your grandmother is no better," Samuel replied, smiling through his tears. On a crisp autumn day, as the aspens turned gold and the air carried the promise of winter, the entire Lancaster family gathered at the original homestead for a celebration. It was Samuel and Temperance's 40th wedding anniversary, and their children had planned a surprise party. The house and yard were full of people, not just family but neighbors and friends from Deer Lodge and beyond. There were people whose lives had been touched by Samuel and Temperance's generosity over the decades, travelers who had found shelter in their barn and gone on to build their own lives in Montana, families who had been helped through hard times by a basket of food or a loan that was never called in. As Samuel stood on the porch watching the celebration, his arm around Temperance's waist, Stephen called for everyone's attention. "Most of you know the story of how my parents met," Stephen began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "How my father showed up here as a stranger, and my mother, in her wisdom and kindness, gave him work. What you might not know is that they taught us, their children, that family is not just about blood. It is about showing up for people, opening your heart and your home, and trusting that love will grow in the spaces you make for it." He raised his glass. "To Samuel and Temperance Lancaster, thank you for showing us what it means to build a life based on generosity, hard work, and love. And thank you for creating a legacy that will continue for generations to come." The crowd echoed the toast, and Samuel felt Temperance lean into him, her body still fitting perfectly against his even after all these years. Later, as the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed in various rooms throughout the house, Samuel and Temperance slipped away to their favorite spot, the porch where they had spent countless evenings over the decades. 40 years, Temperance mused. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. I know what you mean. I can still see you so clearly, that first night giving food to those strangers. I knew then that you were someone special. You knew no such thing. You were hungry and tired and looking for a place to sleep." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her temple. "I was looking for you. I just did not know it yet." They stood together in the moonlight, listening to the sounds of their family settling in for the night, the homestead quiet and peaceful around them. Samuel thought about the journey that had brought him here, all the miles he had traveled and the mistakes he had made. He thought about the young man he had been, restless and searching, never quite fitting anywhere he went. That young man would hardly recognize the life Samuel had now. A wife he loved more with each passing year, children and grandchildren who carried on their values. Land that was not just property but home in the deepest sense of the word. And all of it had started with a simple act of kindness, a woman opening her barn to strangers. "Thank you," Samuel said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing something in me worth keeping. For giving me a chance when you had every reason to send me away. For building this life with me." Temperance turned in his arms and looked up at him, her green eyes still bright despite the silver in her hair and the lines on her face. "Samuel Lancaster, loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. You are not the only one who found what you were looking for that night. I had convinced myself I was content alone, that I did not need anyone. But you reminded me that life is meant to be shared, that love is worth the risk of loss. So thank you for staying. Thank you for seeing me not as a widow who needed rescuing, but as a partner who could build something beautiful alongside you." They kissed there on the porch, a kiss that held 40 years of love and commitment, of challenges overcome and joys shared. And when they finally went inside to join their family, Samuel knew that he would never drift again. He was home, and home was wherever Temperance was. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Samuel and Temperance aged gracefully together. In their 70s, they handed over the daily operations of the homestead to Stephen and Thomas, content to advise and support while their sons took on the heavy work. Samuel still worked in his shop most days, though his hands were not as steady as they once were. Temperance still tended her garden, though she needed help with the heavier tasks now. They watched their grandchildren grow and marry and begin families of their own. The homestead expanded to accommodate the growing clan, with new houses and barns dotting the property. But the original cabin remained, carefully maintained and cherished as the heart of the family legacy. On a warm summer evening just after Samuel's 78th birthday, he and Temperance sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. But tonight, Samuel felt unusually tired, his chest heavy. Temperance noticed immediately, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Should I call for the doctor?" she asked, taking his hand. Samuel shook his head. "No, my love, I am just tired. Come, sit with me." Temperance settled beside him, and they watched the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Samuel thought about all the sunsets they had witnessed together, each one precious, each one a gift. "I've had a good life," he said quietly, "better than I ever deserved, and it is all because of you." "We had a good life together," Temperance corrected, squeezing his hand. "Everything we built as partners. Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will keep opening the barn to strangers, that you will keep teaching our family that generosity is never wasted, that kindness matters. I promise. Though I hope you will be here to help me keep that promise for many more years." Samuel smiled and kissed her hand. "I hope so too." But in his heart, he knew his time was drawing short, and strangely, he felt no fear. He had lived fully, loved completely, and left a legacy that would continue long after he was gone. What more could any man ask for? That night, Samuel passed peacefully in his sleep, Temperance holding his hand. When she woke to find him gone, she wept, her heart breaking even as she gave thanks for the 45 years they had shared. Their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn and celebrate a life well lived, and Samuel was laid to rest on a hill overlooking the homestead, where he could watch over the land and family he had loved so deeply. Temperance lived another 5 years, surrounded by family and love. She kept Samuel's promise, continuing to open the barn to travelers and teaching her great-grandchildren about the importance of generosity and kindness. When she finally joined Samuel on that hill, the family knew that an era had ended but a legacy would continue. The Lancaster homestead remained in the family for generations. The story of Samuel and Temperance was passed down to each new generation, a reminder of how love can transform a life, how a simple act of kindness can change everything, how home is not a place, but the people you choose to build a life with. And in the barn that had started it all, travelers still found shelter on cold nights. The Lancaster family, honoring their ancestors' memory, kept the doors open to those in need, just as Temperance had done on that long-ago evening when a drifter named Samuel Lancaster rode in looking for rest and found his forever home. The story of a woman who sheltered strangers and the cowboy who saw her generosity and stayed forever became legend in that part of Montana, a testament to the enduring power of love and kindness in a harsh and beautiful land.